wherever you are and whenever you are. Welcome, good souls, the planet and beyond to Paranormal Now. I'm Alan B. Smith. Join us as we traverse the cosmic highway of paranormal portals and tantalizing turnoffs. In the first hour tonight, we welcome Tom Reed and Janelle Hawes to fill us in on what's happening with the UFO Monument Park in Sheffield, Massachusetts, which I know a lot of KGRA listeners are very curious to hear about. In the second half of this first hour joins my old friend Mac Barnes, a.k.a. the Star Wars Encyclopedia and comic book store owner, to update us on The Force and the future of Star Wars. Later tonight in the second hour, it is a pre-record. So this hour is live. The second hour is a pre-record of an interview I did with Brian Forrester of Hidden Inca Tours, where we discussed elongated skulls of Peru, megalithic structures, civilizations that predate current historical records, and of course, ancient aliens. So hang in for that second hour. It's really fascinating. I enjoyed that conversation prolifically while he was down in Peru, and here I am up in New York. Share your thoughts and experiences with us during or after the show on Facebook, facebook.com/paranormalnowradio, Instagram @paranormalnow, and on Twitter @paranormal_now. And of course, please join us in the KGRA chat room, where we will keep an eye on all of your comments and questions, though it'll be a little tight trying to get questions in tonight, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. So my first guest, I'll just bring them on right now. We've got Tom Reed and Janelle Hall. Tom, how are you? Welcome back.
Hey, thanks, man. Thanks for having me, and thanks for keeping your listeners up to speed with what's going on here and giving us this time today. A lot has happened. And what I want to say is my cousin Nellie, who I love to death, has never gone on the air with me in the past. But due to the recent circumstances, which you're well aware of, she is going to be getting more and more involved. And so this is the first time she'll be on the air. And one other thing I want to mention before we get started here is that our monument in the park and everything that's going on with that has gotten very legal, and our attorneys are definitely speaking directly with the town of Sheffield's attorney, which is Mark Reich with the Copeland and Page Law Firm in Boston. And so what I did for you guys tonight is I actually posted on the ufopark.org website the letter that this conversation is referring to tonight. So if they go to www.ufopark.org and go down to news, you can actually pull up the letters that have been sent out by my attorney.
Tom, can you just give us, for those who may be listening for the first time, a quick recap on what happened?
Yeah. Well, the town of Sheffield actually erected the monument in 2015, and I had nothing to do with it. I live 1,000 miles away. The acting mayor, if you will, is Nadine, and her administrative assistant is Rhonda, and they're both with the town of Sheffield. And they're the same individuals who actually went to the papers in 2019 stating they had nothing to do with the placement of the monument, because there is an interest in rebranding the name of the park and, having more control of it locally. By alluding to the fact that it was abandoned, or that someone else might have put it there, not taking responsibility for what they did, they were able to send their crews in and actually remove the monument as if it was an abandoned marker. In fact, it wasn't. It was actually placed there by the town themselves. So this marker, or this monument that's in Sheffield, is actually located at the exact location of where this incident went that made U.S. history. And I think the influx of visitors and the amount of films that have been shot there and the interest in the park, and I can see it from their point of view. My father was a mayor. My father was acting mayor in office. And I think if you had that kind of an influx coming into your town and you're sitting there at happy hour or what have you, or at the Elks Club or wherever they hang out, you're saying to yourself, why don't we have more control over this thing? And I would be more than willing to work with the town on that if we've never not included them in anything. But the way they went about it was unlawful. And it's now fueled it's a pending lawsuit right now to get that monument back. I mean, it's basically a theft of property, but what's more damaging is the slander and the blatant malice that went along with it, which made the front page of a lot of local newspapers and the Boston Globe, actually. And that didn't only hurt our family, but it hurt the reputation of the locals who went out of their way to testify and give these statements to the Historical Society. So, for one, I think the town of Sheffield deserves a more honest select board. And again, I say this as someone whose father was acting mayor and who grew up in small town politics. And with that said, my cousin has been really supportive, as a lot of my family are very upset over this. I mean, it's not only our history, and it's something that we're actually proud of. I mean, it's a unique thing to be involved with, and it's been quite trying,
Well,
And
it's
yeah, and now we finally feel vindicated in some way, and
Mhm.
have this monument. And let me tell you something else that really bothers me. We have our family has always kept the locals involved. We built this park in Sheffield for them. So it really stung when the town or the select board chose to remove the only thing in that park that had our family's name on it.
Mhm.
That hurt.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. It's been a point of contention, hasn't it, for decades? The fact that your family and yourself shared this experience, a close encounter with a UFO followed by an abduction, and that has that. I guess that's never really gone away.
In what respect? I'm sorry.
That
You mean as
people did
per,
not like the idea that you were sharing the story
no,
about.
no, no. I don't think that's it. I mean, if you look at the amount of testimony that has come out of that community,
Uh-huh.
you've got over 250 witnesses. You've got the radio station that broadcast it back in 1969, who, they certainly need to have their testimony remain pure too. But when you start lying about who put a monument there in 2019 that represents something that happened in 2016, now you've got, hey, why, if this isn't true, then I'm not going to put up with that. We're going to get to the bottom of what happened here, and we're going to file a sizable lawsuit against the town of Sheffield for this reason. I mean, we need to be vindicated. The witnesses need to be vindicated. WSBS Radio, I think you've met them or been on or spoken to them, if I'm not mistaken. At least Bill has. Testimony and the polygraphs that we've taken, and the amount of time and energy that's gone into seeing this through. We've got, a judge involved in this in the 30th District Court, who I think you've probably met or know of. And we've got the governor, the lieutenant governor. We've sponsors of the park include, Bill and your station for the most part. And a electric car manufacturer, Ben Hansen from Factor Fake, Travis Walton, Mike Barr's coming on board, Dean Hagland from the X-Files. These people did not come on board to have this happen in the 11th hour.
Right. But for someone to do such a mean thing, right? It seems to be directed at the family name, like you said, by removing that particular thing. I just wonder if, even if the town at large has always been kind of okay with this, with what happened to you and your family, it seems to me like there are some few people who have some sort of bitterness towards that. Because why else would you attack the work that you've done to develop such a beautiful park? I feel like there must be a good reason for that. Have you talked to anybody? Have you heard anything what the motives were?
I spoke to someone yesterday, actually, who's very good friends with the senator, and even the people that we had intervene, if you will, and make these phone calls. Nobody can understand what the attitude is of Sheffield and why they're acting this way. I don't think there is an answer. I mean, this has been going on. I'll tell you what I think. Now, that doesn't mean I'm right, but in 2015, Rhonda Lombarda, through the arbitration of Copeland and Page in Boston, put this monument there, which was, and where it was an abandoned road or an easement that was 25 years it had been considered abandoned. And when you deny access for an easement that you've been given or given by Pine Island Farms, which is who actually owns the land, the town has never owned the land. So they put the monument there. Now, being that it became very popular and a destination spot, the town now wants to reopen the road and try to claim their rite of passage, which would give them an easement to that side of the property, so they can now control or have some input or control over that side of the park, which is where I leased the land. So one of the things that came up in all this was that Rhonda Lombardo, who actually had that monument put there, did not have the authority to make that decision at the time. So she backpedaled and said that she had nothing to do with it. Now, she acted under Nadine, who's the acting mayor, But at the time, they're friends, so she's like, well, just say you didn't have anything to do with it, and it'll all go away because Mr. Reed lives almost 1,000 miles away. So they basically purged themselves back in 2015, backed themselves in a corner, and they really got nowhere to go with it. So I think at this point, they're just trying to, a small town, big fish in a small pond, and they think that by sticking to their guns, they can ride this out and hopefully, keep themselves out of the out of court. Now, we did have an agreement in place by our attorney and Kyle Silverman, who had spoken directly with the Mark Reich, their attorney, and there was an agreement to return the monument about 4 to 5 weeks ago. However, at the last minute, there was a letter that was given out to Shockwave Motors and Karen Hankey that was written to them that they would only get their stuff back if they agreed pretty much not to file suit or charges and to let well enough leave it alone. And of course, we can't do that because what's happening involves more than just one or two people. This involves a group of people. This involves, the Roswell Museum is a sponsor of this park. Our lawyer did not get involved in this thing to just say, okay, well, just put it back now and we're all fine. I mean, there's a lot of expenses that I've acquired. I've got several letters that have been written out. He's the law firm's like, look, they broke the law. There's a lawsuit here, and we're gonna move forward with it.
So class action.
Yeah, that's where we are right now. We are in the middle of that. We are putting it together. We've got several letters from people already that are on board with us. Of course, not everybody wants to have their name involved or a business involved with a suit of any kind. I mean, it's just not something that some people want to be involved with. But I would say at this point, at least 50% of the people have already sent in letters, to include Judge Titus and Don Schmidt, who is now on board. You know who he is. He's on the board of Roswell. Sure. He's on board with us. He's sending letters in. So we've got a lot of support. And, here's the other caveat, if you will. Mm-hmm. If this wins in court or holds up in court, and it should, I don't see any reason it wouldn't, it might be the first time a UFO-related case or incident has ever held up in court, has ever been victorious in a court of law. So, I look at it that way, too, because I've always been one to look at the positives, of where you are and what you're doing. So who knows? I mean, I can't see us losing. We're going to win this thing. It might take a little longer than we had hoped. Now, of course, we've got that $7,000, telescope sitting in New York being ready to be put into the park. But I think we need to take care of this first, one thing at a time.
It's interesting, yeah, because not only has your experience and encounter been written into U.S. government history and officiated, but yeah, by taking it to court and presuming that you come out the victor in this, it really does sort of solidify the validity of that event.
Yeah, one more time, right? It just gives it that one extra kick in the pants, So, and I don't think we're going to lose. I don't think we can lose.
Well, what can you say? Because you're talking about some of these other players on the other side here. I mean, if it's a class action lawsuit, are you restricted to share certain information, or are you comfortable just speaking openly at this point?
Well, there are some things I can't say. I mean, I can say this. And I'll give you an idea where we are with the lawsuit. How's that? So sure. Our law firm, which is out of Palm Beach, they were my law firm when I owned the modeling agency, Miami Models. And so I have a long-standing relationship with this law firm, and they are now huge. I mean, they have like 8 partners, like 20 or 30 lawyers within this law firm. I mean, they're heavy hitters. The issue is that they can't litigate in Massachusetts. And so we were going to have the case heard in Florida, where I still have an address there as well. However, at this point, I think because of the, if you look at what has been said or the statements that were made by the town itself and Nadine particularly, as well as Rhonda, you'll see that about 90% of what they say is retracted or they changed their mind. And you can't go by this handshake agreement or even an email. Everything changes constantly. So my attorney is just like, well, we don't even want to at this point continue to, waste time with letters, because I pay out for these letters. They send, they're sent, and then another one responds to it. And next thing you know, then at the 11th hour, they change their mind again. So we are now speaking with an attorney. His first name is Jay. I'll give you that much. And we are going to be ponying up with a law firm in Massachusetts who will be following or under the directive of this law firm in Palm Beach. So we're going to have two law firms going after the town of Sheffield.
Well, for anyone listening, if you're curious as to what the park looks like, you can just go to the Facebook page, UFO Monument Park. But you can find it on TripAdvisor, and there's photos there. I mean, it's a really pretty park.
Oh, it's everywhere. It's on Yelp. It's on Google Maps. It's internationally recognized. There's been several television shows that have been filmed there. And you know what? And I look at it this way. This is a small town of like 3,000 people. It's like a village. And here you are you've got Ancient Aliens filming, and Netflix has been there, New England Legends, it's been on Discovery Channel. These people are like, oh my God, we got to get our hands around this. But there's a right and wrong way to approach that with me. You don't just, make an agreement, slander me in the papers, lie about it, and say, oh, we didn't have anything to do with it. So that gives you the right to send someone over there and remove it from the property, and then go, well, hey, that cost us money, so now you're going to pay to get it back. No, I'm not. You know what I mean? I'm not paying anything to put it back. You're going to put it back. And matter of fact, I want you to wash that before you even, get it within, 100 yards of that park, and make sure it's level when you put it down. And it better be in the same condition it was when you got it.
Yeah, that's a respectable thing.
Yeah, exactly. And we're not seeing that. We're not seeing that from the town. We're not seeing that regard, if you will.
So Janelle, welcome to Paranormal Now.
Thank you.
So you are part of the Reed family, and you also professionally work with finances. So what's your role in all of this?
So I have like a two-part role. My first role was the family support role. Mm-hmm. And I came in, on the back end of Tom going through this long battle, and, just coming in as family and saying, okay, how can I help? And that kind of escalated into the other side, which is I'm involved in event planning and businesses that create events around, specially themed events. Let's just sum it up to that. And we just started collaborating back and forth with ideas on how to grow and just how to be positive and get past and think bigger than what he was facing. And the more he was telling me, what he was facing, what he was going through, he's sending me letters. The letters that were sent from the attorneys, copies of emails and things that were coming back and forth. And, in my experience, I work, in government, so I have a different perspective. I look at things a little differently, and I was able to give him some of that perspective. Mm-hmm. And it kind of led us in a different direction where we said, okay, and that's really how Tom came to the idea. I think that they wanted to really wrap their hands around this park and all the activity that was going on in the park. Sure. Because especially when you are a small town, you want to try to monopolize on anything that's going to bring in revenue when you're a small town, because of where I've been and where I've worked, we just started to kind of come down with ideas, try to figure out what the angle was. But at the end of the day, whether it was directed towards, the monument with our family name on it or not, mm-hmm. Whether it was directed towards the park and the incident itself that occurred, this would have been our 50th anniversary for this event, that we now are unable to celebrate because of this whole thing. And, there's a lot of family emotion that's behind it that, all the family members are really coming together. We have a lot of different professionals in our family. Everybody's kind of adding in their expertise, giving their advice, pointing and connecting us and networking with us. So that we can get this done, because at the end of the day, this event, it validated these kinds of incidents against all the naysayers that are out there, over decades of naysayers that say these things don't happen, and it validated it for the people of Sheffield. So I think our history, we've shown that we've done so much for the community. We've always directed it towards the community. It's never really been about the Reed family, but in this instance, our family name is on that monument, so it is personal. as much as it is for the public, it is still personal. So that's kind of how I got involved, because, this is my family, and I'm watching my family member, battle Goliath. And, I just have to jump in and use the expertise that I have, the government expertise that I have, the finance expertise that I have, to help him on his battle. And then through that collaboration, we ended up, producing some extra events for the community that does support us, that does show us a lot of love. And, and we're pretty excited about those things too, because we're trying to stay focused on those positive things too, so that we're not always concentrated on the battle, but we're coming in from all sides, all fronts.
Well, I think it sounds like a really good idea that you're on the team to help support and get this going. So I guess in a way you can sort of turn some of this negative publicity around.
Yeah.
And not twist it, but make use of it in a positive way.
Right.
Tom, do you think that all this, the lawsuit and the publicity, will turn out to be a beneficial thing for you in the long run?
Well, you can look at it from a couple of different angles here. I mean, sure, I think that eventually we're going to win this thing. There's no doubt in my mind about that, and it is going to be, or make a lot of the papers. There's going to be a lot of coverage over this thing. I'm sure of that, and so it will bring attention to the park. I would have preferred not to have a negative spin with the town, because you never know what's going to happen in the future here. Plus, we've got another documentary coming out, and of course, there's a book being written finally just to preserve what happened. And so you can't not include these negative aspects to it. But like my cousin said, Nellie, like we call her. She's all, she too, it looks at that she's a half full type of person, just like I am, so it is going to generate more interest. It's just going to drive more interest to the park, and we are going to eventually win this thing. But unfortunately, when the book comes out and the documentaries come out, Sheffield's going to be put in a bad light. I mean, how can they not be? Not the town of Sheffield, not the locals, but, the select board. And so I didn't want that to happen. I really didn't. I thought that the attitude of some of these people had changed over the time. I was very optimistic about things, but it's only a handful of people. You can count them on one hand. And I think once those people are removed, for whatever reason, whatever agenda they have, it seems to be something very, there's a tight circle there. And there are some of the things I would love to mention on the air, but I really can't. I can say this, that there are some people that locally that were coming to our aid, or I should say supporting us, and that they got some letters in the mail about back taxes for property out of nowhere, and they were being harassed by the city hall or the town hall over things that they shouldn't have been. So there is almost a this mafia type, good old boy, local, we run the town, almost like you'd see in an old Smoking Abandoned film. I mean, it's ridiculous. But anyway, I think that, we've got a lot out there right now. We've got a hell of a team, and we're going to see it through, and we're going to get our monument back. And we've got other benches going in. We've got Beth from the Roswell Museum has just been gracious enough to send a very big check, which is going to go towards getting our sign back, the governor's citation that was mounted or affixed to the top of our monument. Now that's being remade, and it's going to go into another sign, which is going to be put into the park until we actually get the monument back, because as our attorney has said, you've got to get our name back in that park. You can't, out of sight, out of mind. The next thing that's going to happen, or what is going to happen, or what we're told is going to happen by a reporter from the Berkshire Eagle, her name's Kristen, is that the park or is going to see a new sign put in there by the select board or the town hall. They're going to try to rebrand this park. So we've got to get our sign back in there. Our name has got to be back into that park very soon. And so, Beth was a sweetheart, and she sent us a check to get that done. So she'll be sponsoring that new sign that's going in. And so little by little, we're going to start taking this park over again. And we'll see the reaction from the town. But this is land that is not theirs. That's something else that a lot of people aren't aware of. This is not town property. Mm-hmm. This property is owned by a dairy farm. and there's only an abandoned easement there. And so they have really gone too far. And I'm sure they've been warned by their law firm not to do this again. So we're going to test the waters with that. We're going to start putting things back in there and see their reaction. If they continue to act like this, then they're going to have even a worse problem. And if they don't, then that's a sign too that we're, gaining momentum. Mm-hmm. And so you've got to, get a little out there. You've got to make some moves to see what the responses are. You can learn a lot more by the way people respond to things.
Well, we're running it out of time. So I just want to, Janelle, really quick, you're going to be at Paraweek this year, correct?
Tom?
Yeah. Oh. Well, here we go. Now this is another.
I'm sorry.
No, this is another problem. We kind of canceled. I think the 50th is going to be canceled for this year because
for real. Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately, we were talking with Lance and we were trying to get something going in Pine Bush, but it's just a little too late. This dragged on. We really hoped that we would have the monument back. So I think what we're going to do is Nellie and I are going to work on UFO Expo. It's ufoexpo.com. You can look it up. And we are now going to be moving our events into St. Augustine, Florida.
Oh, okay, great.
So it's warmer we're going to have it in September, October. It's going to be warmer for the holidays. I don't think at this point I'd like to do something in Pine Bush. I love Pine Bush. I like the event there. I love, Domine's fantastic. The event is fantastic, but at the same time, it is cold in October. And with everything going on in Sheffield, I just think maybe we need to move it. And so, So anyway, thanks again, guys. I really appreciate it. Alan, thanks for having me on. I can take a question or two if you've got a few minutes.
We actually got to get to break, but
okay.
Yeah. And Janelle, thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks for having us.
All right. We'll keep in touch, and I wish you guys all the best.
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Good night. All right. Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on KGRA Radio. We'll be right back on the other side of this break with Mac Barnes to talk about the mysteries of the Force. Happy Star Wars.
Mainstream media's most wanted. KGRAradio.com.
Welcome back to Paranormal Now. This is Alan B. Smith, your grateful host on KGRA Radio. My guest now coming up, and it's been too long since he's been on the show, so many of you KGRA listeners may or may not be familiar with Mac Barnes. He came on at Paranormal Now about 2.5 years ago, I think it was, for the first time, and we started talking about Star Wars and science fiction, and he is now a comic book store owner. I call him the Star Wars Encyclopedia. He is a force to be reckoned with, and tonight we will be talking about the Force and the future of Star Wars. And I know for so many of us, Star Wars had a really big impact and on who we are as people and shaped our lives. So for many of us, it's near religious, it's spiritual, it's emotional, and it definitely resonates in that way, I know, with Mac. So Mac, thanks for coming back on again.
Yeah, no problem. I love coming on here and talking with all the many peoples about the Star Wars and the science fiction.
Of course, of course. So, all right, from first question I want to ask you is, what do you think the state of Star Wars is right now? Are we in a good place? What do you think the future will be?
Oh, that's such a tough opening question. But really, I think we're in neither a good position nor a bad position. Mm-hmm. And this is speaking from the point of view of us being still 2 months out from episode 9. I mean, I may have a completely different and opposite opinion in 2 months. But as of right now, I think it's kind of meh. The reason why I say that is because, so we got a beautiful movie with episode 7. A lot of people didn't like it. I loved it. I thought it was great. A lot of people thought it was too much like A New Hope, the original Star Wars movie. And I definitely see the parallels, and I definitely see that. But if you don't know this, I mean, George Lucas said in many interviews multiple times that Star Wars is poetry, and like poetry, it repeats itself. So, there's sort of this mold that Star Wars always kind of follows roughly. So But once we got that episode 8, The Last Jedi, we were assuming we were going to get more. In episode 7, you get to see the Knights of Ren, who, if you remember episode 8, weren't even touched on. We don't even get a single 30 seconds of screen time for them. And so a lot of people, Rian Johnson took J.J. Abrams', plot from episode 7, and with episode 8, Rian Johnson just kind of did his own thing and almost completely disregarded it, other than, the things that you would, the main plot points that you have to hit on. It was, completely unrecognizable as being linked, really. And a lot of people didn't like that. And now with episode 9 returning to the hands of J.J. Abrams, hopefully it's going to go back to, hopefully he can, scratch up whatever he can and, make the best out of this bad situation, or, not as good situation. I definitely think this sequel trilogy would have been an amazing trilogy if they had just signed J.J. for all 3.
I can understand that. And my feeling is that J.J. really does respect George Lucas's work.
No doubt.
And I think that we're going to get in this final episode of the Skywalker saga is it's going to be crammed with a lot, because they're trying to connect the original trilogy, the prequel trilogy, and the previous 2 films that came out in the last few years. So I hope that I really do hope this. I hope, for those that are listening, there are entities called the Wills. And there really is a sort of a pun intended there. So the Wills have some control over the Force, or are one with the Force. And in the original prequels, a lot of people were really upset with the idea of midichlorians. And midichlorians meant that when you were strong in the Force, you can measure your midichlorian count in the blood level of that Force user. And so some people assume that meant that either you're born with it genetically, with these midichlorians, and they, feed symbiotically off of the Force, or you're not, which means you'll never have a connection to the Force. And that upset a lot of people because it took away the spiritual, the mystery aspect of the Force.
Right.
But I think that was a major misunderstanding, because the way I understand George Lucas explaining it is that they are symbiotic, right? They live off of each other. So if you're strong in the Force, your midichlorian levels will go higher. If you have high midichlorian levels, your Force powers will go higher. There's no chicken or egg. It kind of, one can come before the other and it doesn't matter, right?
Exactly, no doubt. A lot of people get that confused. See, again, you have to think bigger picture. I think George Lucas was always thinking bigger picture. And a lot of people say, oh, he didn't know that his first film was going to be a hit. Well, why did he write out a full trilogy before he even presented, the original Star Wars movie? It's because he had a kind of a storyline or a timeline that he wanted to explore. I mean, with the success, that just allowed him access to be able to do that. Yeah. But back to your original question, what he said many times, as though you're recalling things from the prequel trilogy about the midichlorians specifically, in the original trilogy, it's, said multiple times, and in the prequel trilogy, I mean, in probably every single Star Wars movie that has, Jedi or Sith in it, Force wielders, it's said that, the Force is within all living things. Like, it's like blood to your body. It is symbiotic. Whether or not you can tap into it or not and control it and harness it is a completely different thing.
Right. Because it pervades everything, right?
Exactly.
And I remember one of the comic book series, there were some beings or a planet that was Force resistant. And that really bothered me, because it didn't make sense that plants could be resistant to Force, or some aliens could be resistant to the Force, because the Force is literally supposed to be omnipresent. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many parallels with it in Christianity, I'd say. How God is supposed to be involved in, all things. And, like, the Force, what you were saying, how I said it's in all living things, but what you were saying is how, you can measure that. If that's like being able to say comparatively that a preacher, is stronger in his faith because he puts more time into harnessing those skills, spends more time reading his Bible, spends more time studying God's word. and that makes him stronger in his faith. The same way a Jedi will spend countless hours, whether they're, exercising their body, whether they're, using their Force abilities, whether they're meditating, whatever, that makes them stronger in the Force and allows them to tap more into their potential. It's all how much, they say with anything in life, you get in what you put, or you get out what you put in. There you go.
Sure.
So, I mean, the more effort, all living things, I believe it's supposed to be interpreted that all, living things in the Star Wars universe have the Force in them, and that can be touched on, whether in a major, I'm a Darth Vader and I can rule the galaxy based on my power level, or whether you're like, if you remember from Rogue One, one of my favorite characters is Chirrut Imwe, which is that blind guardian of the Whills. And he was such a killer character, but see, he didn't have probably a great midi-chlorian count. He wasn't supposed to be super duper strong, but the Force allowed him to be able to see, though he was a blind man.
Right. So, but the idea, he was still Force sensitive.
Exactly. Yeah.
And he was able to sort of garner additional, human abilities.
Yeah.
Because of that, that still keeps in the theme that any one of us can tap into it.
Yeah, I'm a full believer of that. I think with the proper training, anybody can do anything. And that goes with saying, being a Force wielder, because like I just said, the Force is in all living things in the Star Wars universe. So if you just spend the time and dedication into, training that and really working on your craft, you can do some things.
What would you like to see happen in Episode 9?
Oh man, it's so hard to say. But if I had to just really, label it one thing, this is crazy because I'm going to turn some heads by saying this. But I'd really, really like for us all to be shocked, and I'd like the dark side to win. I want us to be left at the end of Episode 9, walking out of the theater, thinking that the Star Wars universe is about to be ran by the First Order with Rey in hand, or that now say that both something nuts happens and Rey and Kylo Ren both die, and we're left in some kind of limbo. What is the galaxy going to be like? Just I want there to be, while a lot of people for the final chapter of their trilogy or the final chapter of their franchise to answer all the questions, I want it to open more doors and give me more questions, because that'll allow Star Wars to be able to use their new mediums that they've been tapping into a lot with the TV, with the Rogue One show, or the Rogue One series going to be, getting that spinoff from the Rogue One movie, with the Mandalorian that I'm pumped up about. And all the comic books, dude, since you mentioned earlier me opening the comic book shop back in May, it's so crazy. I'm really reading my books. Before, I had still been collecting all the Star Wars comics since Disney purchased Star Wars back in 2014. But I hadn't read so much of my material. But now that I'm, in the shop on a day-to-day basis and have time to read every once in a while, I've been reading some of the Star Wars comic material. And I'll tell you what, I feel like a lot of the fans are missing out on some great stories.
Yeah, if you actually... Kessel Run Comics is the name of your store. And so anyone down in the North Carolina area, it's in Elizabethtown. So you can please go check out Kessel Run Comics and say hi to Mac.
Yeah.
And also Mac's Instagram account is just Kessel Run Comics.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so of all the comics that you've read, Star Wars wise, are there any particular aspects that maybe the moviegoers don't understand about the Star Wars universe that you think is really fascinating?
I think one thing that the fans want a whole lot more is they want darker Star Wars stories, or they want, they want Disney to push the envelope with these new films and stuff. And with Rogue One, with that series, they might, the new TV series, they might do that. With The Mandalorian, I already know for a fact, since that's about a month and 11 days out, coming out on November 12th on Disney+. Yeah, I'm not sponsored, but I'm plugging. But But I'm pumped up for that show because it's going to be for adults, man. Like, the trailer shows a guy getting, shot in the middle of a doorway. Like, I don't know. And he's going to get, like, cut off at the midsection. It just looks like the type of Star Wars, like, gritty, dark, like, kind of ambiguous that I've been wanting. Like, I want that feel from Star Wars. And I feel like there's so much untapped potential from that, and I feel like they are more likely, because they know a lot more people are going to go see the movies and are going to watch the TV shows, that they're not going to do it in most of that medium.
Right.
They're going to do it in the niche mediums. Like, they're going to do it in the novels and really, explain to you, like, in, like, the long-winded chapters on how, gruesome something is or how killer something is. But in the comic books, I'm not being biased. I can't sit down and read a Star Wars novel, man. I've been trying. I've collected every single one, but I'll get like 3 or 4 chapters in and I'll be like, dude, this sucks, because there's no pictures. There's nothing to really stimulate me while I'm getting what's happening, and I enjoy it. It's just not enthralling the way a comic book is. You don't have to read that much, and you get to look at this beautiful artwork, man.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense because Star Wars began as a visual medium.
No doubt. Yeah. I completely
Not like Lord
agree.
of the Rings.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so they definitely, right now there's a series that's quite dark called Star Wars Target Vader. It's only halfway through. It's a 6-issue limited series, but it's only 3 issues in, and it is fantastic.
I think Star Wars has always had a streak of darkness. I mean, Revenge of the Sith is definitely the favored of the prequels. And then also, we had a death. I'm not going to say it just in case someone did not see episode 7, but there was a death, or murder, I should say, in episode 7, which was pretty harsh.
Right.
And my favorite film, all right, I'm going to say something it seems contradictory. I agree that Empire Strikes Back, hands down, is the best crafted Star Wars film, without a doubt. But my favorite Star Wars film is Return of the Jedi.
Yeah. Woo.
No?
Heard you, brother.
Because there's heart, there's emotion, there's that darkness that you talk about that you have to face in life, and that really rings true for me.
No doubt, dude. I've said no doubt like 5 times. I guess that's just my catchphrase now. But man, that is definitely that movie's amazing. I love James. I don't know too much about the director of that movie. I believe it's James Marquand, but he did a fantastic job. I feel like where that movie went, especially in the 3rd act, like, everything basically indoor battle, like both in space and, on the Death Star and on the Forest Moon itself. Like, that whole act had me on the edge of my seat, both as a child and even now when I watch.
Yeah, the pacing and the editing was just brilliant. And some of those shots, the cinematography, really, it holds up beyond what you still see today. It was so innovative then, and so beautifully framed that it really is eternal.
I couldn't agree more. One of my friends was telling me how he thought so we watched the whole original trilogy together in about like 8 hours. We took a lunch break and stuff, but we watched 4 and 5, then went and grabbed lunch and came back for 6. And while we were eating lunch, he was like, the original Star Wars, and this is like maybe his 3rd time ever watching these movies. So he's like, it was hard getting through that first one. He was like, that first one, he was like, it looks old. He was like, I could just tell it was, a movie from like the 80s or something. And I was like, late 70s, so you're right there. And he was like, well, that episode 5, like the Empire, he was like, they were kick-ass, man. They were like, blah, blah, blah. They took down the shield on Hoth and all that. He was like, I was getting excited. And he was like, at the end, the big reveal, he was like, everybody knows it, but it was still hyped to see it again, and really be paying attention. And I was like, yeah. And he was like, what's in the last one? And I said, dude, the last one's my favorite. I said, I can't wait till we get back. And we get like Jedi Knight Luke Skywalker kind of teetering on the dark side there when he walks into Jabba's palace and force chokes the Gromorian guards. That's like one of my favorite all-time scenes.
Mm-hmm. Do you think we'll actually get Luke Skywalker back in the flesh for episode 9?
Just because a lot of people have the issue with a lot of people have the issue with like, I think retconning is, or maybe not retconning, but like bringing people back to life. Like a lot of people had an issue with the fact that Darth Maul, was killed in episode 1, but then like, whether you were or weren't keeping up with the Clone Wars series as it was coming out, a lot of people didn't know until like a year after the Clone Wars series had debuted Darth Maul that he was back alive again. And so many people on the internet, I remember it like it was yesterday. They were like, "What? Darth Maul's still alive? Why is he in the Clone Wars show?" And, since I was keeping up with it, I was like, dude, he's been in the show for like, a whole season now, blah, 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 whatever. And they just, no, well, how'd he live? Blah, blah, blah. You try to explain it to somebody the way they explain it to you in the series, because in the series it explains that he literally lived just based off of his hate and anger and like surge for revenge for Obi-Wan. Like that was all of what kept him alive. Like he didn't really eat all that much. Like of course he found some scraps here and there, but like Darth Maul basically kept himself alive just based on hate and anger alone. Yeah. And when I tried to explain that to a couple of my friends, they thought that was so stupid, but like I thought that was badass, man. Yeah. Like you're telling me that like that's the first Sith I had ever, I believe like a Sith could probably do something like that, but like the first time to ever see it and have it be confirmed that that's how he lived, a lot of my friends didn't like that, but I thought it was awesome. But to answer that original question, I hope they don't bring Luke back, because his death, him like astrally projecting himself, or like, he was chilling on Octo, just like, meditating on that rock, and, it flashed back and showed them on the planet Crate, that salt planet, and, Kylo just waves the lightsaber through him. And I remember sitting in the theater watching episode 8 when that happened, and it showed Luke just, concentrating like super hard, about to like bust a blood vessel in his head or something.
Like a billion miles away.
Yeah. And that's such a nuts like display of strength, of like course. To be like systems away and do that. That is wild.
See,
so
I think that he left Rian Johnson left the door open on purpose.
Okay. I like that.
If you go back and watch the film, I think that even if I disagree with a lot of what he did in that film, I really do think that Rian Johnson was very careful to leave things open-ended enough so that whoever the next director comes in is, that they have something to work with.
Right. I hear that.
Even though I think the film doesn't really leave you with anything at the end. Right. But it leaves it open. It's like a kind of a blank slate. Because I think we saw the compass, I think, in relation to the world between worlds in episode 8. So I think that was Rian Johnson kind of winking like, hey, if somebody wants to do something with this, they can. Yeah. And also Luke he wasn't Yoda. He wasn't getting sick, right? He wasn't sick of old age. He wasn't killed. Obi-Wan was in the middle of a battle and he's like, oh, I better do this now. Whereas Luke, I feel like, I don't know if he really exerted himself enough that he couldn't keep himself present, because it seemed very much like a choice.
Right.
In that moment. Like he's looking off to the sunset, he hears a voice of some sort, and he chooses to go beyond. I think that maybe he's not a Force ghost, but maybe he's not going to come back in the flesh, but maybe he'll come something else, something in between worlds. Not literally that place in between worlds, but
dude, that place was awesome. You're talking about the place that was revealed in like
Clone Wars.
Yeah, it was Rebels.
Rebels, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that place was awesome, and how like Ahsoka and Ezra were running from Palpatine basically the whole time.
Yeah, I love that. See, but that's
such an awesome episode.
Yeah, and I think that's the kind of bold storytelling I think JJ is going to go for. So I was surprised, to be honest.
Yeah, I think if there's any chance that we're going to tap into like time travel in the Star Wars universe, because I don't know if a lot of people know this, but even if we're talking about like Legends material, I'm pretty sure it's never been touched with Star Wars, because Star Wars has like light speed, and we can get places everywhere so fast. Like there's, if that makes sense, there's no need for teleporting, So like, I haven't, but if we start to see some of that, I don't know, like time travel would be pretty crazy. Like, but you could do it. Like we were talking about with the fact that it was shown in Rebels, time travel is more than plausible, I think. And the best person to do that or introduce that into the Star Wars universe just might be JJ, since he has quite the sci-fi resume. I think he'd do it justice.
A question from Bill Skywatcher. He wants to know, do you think that the spinoff from Rogue One on the Disney Plus platform will be a success and draw a large audience? What do you think?
I definitely think that it'll draw an audience, no doubt, because with Star Wars, their first live-action TV show being, this Mandalorian, like I said, a month and 11 days away. Super pumped up for it. Looks gritty. Mm-hmm. Rogue One, a lot of people thought was basically the closest movie that we were getting, whether it be of the 3, movies in the saga or whether it was, like the 3 spin-off movies. It's probably the one closest to, feeling like the original trilogy. So I think if they're making a series off of it, which I've heard of as well, but even though they haven't given us a timeline for it on Disney Plus, I definitely think it'll pull some people because people love the TV medium and people love Star Wars.
Mm-hmm. All right. Really quick. Who is the one character that you relate to the most in Star Wars?
Relate to the most.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to say Luke, but I feel like I'm too morally gray because usually while I do things that help the people around me, I at the end of the day, you're going to be the only person that looks out for you. You know what I'm saying? So I'd say as far as like morals and everything, I probably fit best as like a Qui-Gon Jinn.
All right, nice. Well, Mac, that's it. We're at the end. How do people find out more about Kessel Run Comics? How do they follow you?
So both on Facebook and on Instagram, I am Kessel Run Comics. That's KESSELRUNCOMICS. Also, I'm working on a website. I do already have the domain name saved as Kessel Run. So in a few months, you may be able to find me there and even purchase books from me all the way in New York. All
right, nice. All right, well, thanks, Mac. And we'll have to have you on right before episode 9 comes out. And, of course, afterwards, we'll have to do a post-conversation.
Yeah, I'd love to, dude. Like I said, I love coming on the show and talking to you.
All right, brilliant. Thanks, Mac. Have a good night, man.
Yeah, you guys too.
All right. Good night. So we are moving into the second hour. This is live, and now we're moving into the second hour, which is a pre-record with Brian Forrester. So stay tuned for that. I had a discussion with him this past weekend while he was in Peru, and we talked about the Inca skulls, which may or may not be ancient alien skulls, megalithics, and civilizations that predate current historical timelines. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on KGRA Radio. Taking us out of the break was Septembrio, spelled with a Y, septembrio.com if you want to find out more about them and their music. My guest in this second hour is Brian Forrester. And now this is a pre-recorded interview. So if you were listening in the first hour, which was live, this is not, which means we aren't going to have our open lines for telephone listener call-ins. Now, I promise you that without that aspect of the show, this will be more than fascinating, because we are talking about ancient alien connection to the Paracas elongated Inca skulls, megalithic structures around the world, ancient history, and lost civilizations. We'll get to Brian in just a moment. Thank you to everyone who helped out to subscribe to Paranormal Pop on YouTube. We have reached 100 subscribers, and then some, which means now we have our magical URL for YouTube, which means I can just put a link out there. It's really simple to read and really simple to share. So that link now is youtube.com/paranormalpop. So easy. Thank you so much, everyone. I really do appreciate your support. Andy in the chat room in particular, Maria, thank you so much for sharing and posting. Ron from Earth Radio. Brian Forrester was born in the United States but grew up on the west coast of Canada, where he developed a fascination with native art. Though he did graduate from university with an honors degree, his passion for the art of the indigenous people caused him to become a professional carver of totem poles for over a decade. At 35, he moved to the island of Maui in Hawaii and spent 2 years working with Hawaiian people building a 62-foot double-hull sailing catamaran. This adventure led him to explore Polynesia for several years, and then he chose to visit Peru 12 years ago. His first tour guide in the Inca city of Cusco could not explain how the huge megalithic works of the area were made and by who. Thus he began to explore using his science background, as well as local and foreign geologists, engineers, and oral tradition experts, for the mysteries that underlie these astonishing stone works. This has led to a revelation that the megalithic works of Peru, as well as those in Bolivia, Easter Island, Egypt, Lebanon, Petra, and other places were in fact created many thousands of years before any known culture, and were all seemingly devastated by a global cataclysm some 12,000 years ago. This led him to recently publish the book Aftershock. In all, he has published 36 books as of August 2019, has appeared on numerous television shows such as Ancient Aliens 18 times, numerous radio shows and podcasts, and has explored more than 95 countries. You can find more than 1,200 of his videos on his YouTube channel. Brian, welcome to Paranormal Now.
It's my pleasure, Alan. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's fascinating to me that you sort of got sucked into this late in the game. I mean, this wasn't something that you were doing early on in life, but you were on a trip and it piqued your curiosity. How did that happen?
Well, the important thing is to see these things firsthand. So if you see photographs of places like Machu Picchu or the Great Pyramids of Egypt or whatever, you don't get a sense of scale. You don't get a sense of how complex the construction methods were. So it was my first day when I was in Cusco, Peru, that of course was the Inca capital, that I noticed a major difference between rather simple construction using rough stone and clay as mortar, and then these megalithic works where the stones interlock with one another. In some ways, we can't replicate that stonework today. So being told by my guide that the Inca, who were a Bronze Age people, did the work, I simply said, that's not possible. That's what started my fascination.
Right. Why didn't he have an answer for you?
Well, because the standard education states that the Inca were the first civilization to exist in Cusco, and that obviously that means that everything in the city that's pre-colonial Spanish had to have been made by the Inca, and the evidence is simply not there for that.
Is there a path forward where we can find the evidence or support the evidence?
Well, it's just the contrast between the building techniques is so dramatic that there's no way that one civilization did both types of construction. I see. So it's not like now, right? We hire contractors and other contractors, hire installers, in this complex system that we have now. But even though the system is complex, there are multiple layers, multiple people playing in the game. They're all drawing from the same technological know-how, right? Well, basically, the really interesting thing is I've been to Egypt 7 times, and I've been in Cusco more than 100 times, and the surrounding area where we find the megalithic works. And the building techniques actually are quite different between Egypt and Peru. So some people talk about an advanced ancient civilization. I think there were at least 3.
3 in total?
Yeah, I think at least 3. possibly 4 or 5. I just got back from Turkey, and I was able to see a megalithic site called Hattusha, which again showed evidence of very advanced machining technology.
So if they're using machining technology, why is it we can't find the machines they were using?
Well, that, of course, is one of the most difficult questions, but the standard answer is they came, they built, they left. Whether we're talking about a terrestrial civilization or civilizations or extraterrestrial, I still don't know. But it's we do see examples of technology which is beyond our present capability.
But isn't that odd? I mean, we have computers and software that can do rendering. We can come up with an idea, run it through a program, see if it works. And we can do this at near lightning speed now. And we still can't figure out in our modeling how they did that. Does that indicate that they're using some sort of technology that's completely out of the realm of our known knowledge?
Well, again, it depends where you go. In places like the Giza Plateau and other areas in Egypt, as well as Petra and Little Petra in Jordan, we see that machine tools were obviously at work carving out giant boxes, or in the case of Petra, some pretty huge chambers in the bedrock. There's one that I've been to a couple of times that's 300,000 cubic feet in size. And to say that was done by ancient people with hand tools is completely impossible.
Why is it impossible?
Just because of the sheer volume. The great thing is, as you mentioned in the preamble, I do tours with people in Peru and Egypt and other locations, and quite often we will have a geologist with us. So when we were at Petra, it's all sandstone, and I asked our geologist who was with us, what is the hardness of this material? And she referred to what's called the Mohs scale of hardness, with 10 being diamond, and she said 7. So 7 is harder than tool steel. So that tells you that it had to have been a material harder than tool steel that was employed in order to cut out these giant chambers at Petra.
And again, there's no evidence of those tools, right?
No, not the tools themselves, but the main evidence are the parallel machine marks that we see.
Well, I guess then the next question is, how do you find that missing evidence, right? Because throughout history, thousands of years, we'll uncover sites where there are ancient tools to be found. So how does one go about looking or starting to look for these, what would be absolute treasures, if we could find them?
Well, I guess there are two probable answers to that. One would be, again, that they came, they built, and they left. Another possibility is the ancient cataclysms that occurred around 12,000 years ago, that the devastation was so incredible that everything was destroyed except the stone surfaces, and later cultures that would have moved in, if they had found broken machining technology, they probably would have recycled all of the material. Or the other option is that the machines have been found and they're simply being hidden by governments or other organizations, so that we can't put the whole picture together.
Right. Well, we've heard the story of Egyptian ruins, or a cave, I think it was, in the Grand Canyon, right, where there were Egyptian artifacts apparently found, and then there's this whole story that the Smithsonian covered it up. Do you really think that something like that can go on continuously without some rogue archaeologist saying, "Hey, I'm going to get famous with this find. I'm not going to share this with some secretive government organization"?
Well, the great thing that's happening now is that most of the research that's being done in this area is being done by independent people. They're the ones asking the really probing questions, as in this is clearly machining technology. So most people say, well, what do the academics think? But the academics are either covering this stuff up on purpose or simply ignoring the obvious nature of what's going on. So one thing that's happening now is in Egypt, they're finishing off what will be the largest museum in the world, and it's being built on the Giza Plateau. And so it's so huge in scale that everything from the Cairo Museum will be moved into it, but now they're starting to open up 2 massive tunnel systems, storage tunnels underneath the museum that contain thousands, if not millions, of artifacts. And what we're hoping is that some of the artifacts that will be put on display will be parts of this machining technology that they simply don't recognize as being such.
So perhaps something that is considered unidentifiable might actually turn out to be one of these machining parts or tools, because they're approaching these artifacts with a different mindset, whereas someone like yourself might look at this and have the open mind to think, oh, that's what this could be for.
Yeah, well, actually, there's a really good number of examples that are presently still in the Cairo Museum. There's one disc-shaped object with 3 blades, which is called the schist disc. It's about 2.5 feet in diameter. And if you show that a picture of that to an engineer, they tend to say that it's some type of impeller, that it was part of a machine used for either pushing or pulling water or air. But the label on the display says a lotus display vessel. Mm-hmm. So that's clearly not what it was.
Right, and that's not the first time that's happened in archaeology. I mean, even on occasion, I'll watch like a PBS special, right, or something on National Geographic, and some archaeologist goes back and looks at something and realizes, oh, wait a minute, that's what this is. So that's not necessarily uncommon, right, in archaeology?
Yeah, well, again, another example, which is on display in the Cairo Museum, is there was a cache of turned bowls made out of very hard stone found at the site called Saqqara, where the Step Pyramid is. And I think it was Emery, the archaeologist, who found them, or Flinders Petrie, and there were 30 to 40,000 of them. And since there are about 20 on display, you can tell that they had to have been turned on lathes, and they claim that they're labeled as being pre-dynastic, so that means that they're even claiming that they're older than the potter's wheel. And of course, the potter's wheel is a much simpler mechanism than something turning hard stone bowls.
Right. Okay. So what about these super, super large megalithic scale projects? I mean, the Great Pyramid itself, there apparently are, tool works and found, right? And they're saying that they use rope and pulley systems and ramps to build this thing, but that doesn't seem to be enough to support these giant stones, right? Is there another technology that we just haven't conceived of yet that could have moved these stones?
Well, it's the sheer scale of the Great Pyramid. It's 2.3 to 2.5 million multi-ton blocks. I think from 2 tons to 40 tons, with internal granite stones weighing up to 80 tons. Mm-hmm. And a recent geological study of the limestone, which makes up most of the Great Pyramid, shows that it was made from 3 different types, and none of that is found on the Giza Plateau, but across the Nile in a part of the city of Cairo. So not only is the challenge cutting them and moving them, but moving them across the Nile, then up onto the Giza Plateau, and then putting them together with the casing stone having surgical precision.
Right. But what about lifting? Do you think that the current explanation that they were using ramps and ropes and slaves or citizens or whatever the explanation is today or yesterday?
Well, the basic calculation is that theoretically the pharaoh Khufu had the Great Pyramid constructed, and it took, again, this is all guesswork. It took 25 years to construct the Great Pyramid by itself. So people who have done the proper calculation in terms of the number of stones and the size, etc., is that they would have to move one multi-ton block and set it into place every 2 minutes. And that's clearly impossible.
So, and you can't explain that with sheer numbers of workers, right?
No.
Because then you have a volume problem. Because, you can use manpower in a calculation, right? But you have the actual space and the functionality, the logistics of that is extraordinary. And eventually you just can't get that many people at the same time in the same space. So
no, that's true. And if again, since the quarries are in the city of Cairo, which is across the Nile River from Giza, which is actually Giza is not simply the plateau; it's a city of itself. So, cutting a block, moving it to the Nile, moving it across the Nile, moving it onto the Giza plateau, and surgically fitting it into place every 2 minutes. It doesn't matter how many people you have; the logistics make it impossible.
Right. So why cling to that, and why not just say we don't know yet? Or do you think most archaeologists are honest and say they just don't know yet?
Most of them still claim that the whole ramp theory, and calculations have been done stating that the ramp would use twice as much material as the pyramid itself. So first you have to build the ramp, and then you have to cut the stones and move them across the Nile and up on the plateau and fit them into place. And most are still claiming that that's the way it was done, but that's again the role of independent investigators who clearly concede that doesn't work. So I think what's going to happen is a new generation of archaeologists will come onto the scene with much more open minds based on the facts that are presented, and they will have to start to claim that they simply don't know how the megalithic work of Egypt was done. Of course, when you get farther down the Nile, you get into proper dynastic Egypt, and that's where you see where the columns are made out of several pieces of stone, whereas with the pre-dynastic structure, the columns are made of one giant piece of stone. And that's a big difference.
Do you think that Khufu really was the pharaoh that oversaw this? Because my understanding is that the only place you find his name was in a chamber on the interior, closed off, and was only found by archaeologists. And it seems, and it was painted, and I do believe that, I think the Germans tested the paint, right? A German science team tested and dated the paint, and it wasn't exactly as old as they thought it was. I'm not sure if that's true or not. You can let me know. But the only place in this pyramid is this one little spot where his name was painted on the wall like graffiti. And it seems odd that Egyptians at that time, who were always so proud of the work that they did, and there were all these murals and hieroglyphics exclaiming, their amazingness, and grandness of why would this guy just be so humble?
Well, that's exactly the point. As you state, the kind of sloppy hieroglyphics painted with red ochre paint in what are called the relieving chambers, which are no longer accessible because the Germans went in and took samples and took them back to Germany for testing. And that whole thing now has been hushed up. So it's a subject that a lot of Egyptologists don't want to look at. But the workmanship of the painting is so sloppy compared to the construction of the Great Pyramid that you can't claim that the two are related to each other in terms of time period or technique.
And they seem like a proud people. So why?
Oh yeah. Well, the Egyptians were incredible at recording everything, like how much wheat was being produced, how much beer was being made. But there's no reference to the construction of the Great Pyramid, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Right. So what does that tell us about the timeline then for you?
Well, basically what it tells us is that people moved into the area we call Egypt about 3,100 to 3,200 BC. They found the Great Pyramid complex. They found other megalithic structures. And then pharaoh after pharaoh decided that they would name them after themselves. So Khufu wasn't the builder of the Great Pyramid, but he's the one who named it after himself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that I can believe that. What do you think is the actual origin of the Great Pyramid? Who did the work?
Well, that's the problem. We simply don't know. It's either a lost, very advanced human civilization, or I think you have to entertain the possibility that it was done by extraterrestrials. I'm open to both. And in terms of timeline, because of the weathering that we see on the Sphinx, 200 different geologists from around the world have agreed that that the vertical weathering on the Sphinx was done by precipitation. And so that, if you do a climate model, that dates the Sphinx at least 10,000 years old,
right,
which is about more than 4,000 years older than the dynastic people. So it's believed by many now that the Great Pyramid system and the Sphinx and other structures are probably 12,000 plus years old.
Okay, I was going to ask you that because if this great flooding or catastrophe occurred 12,000-ish years ago, was it built before that cataclysm or after that cataclysm?
Well, that's what's quite intriguing, is that there are some places in Egypt, such as Karnak, which is one of the major sites, and its east to west axis is actually 23 degrees off north, south, east, and west, and almost any culture knows how to align things very close to north, south, east, and west. So that would, I think, indicate that Karnak is 12,000 plus years old, that the Sphinx is as well. And then when you look at the causeway from the Great Pyramid down to the Sphinx, it actually goes off on an angle as if the Great Pyramid was built after the Sphinx was constructed. So it's actually my belief now that the Great Pyramid was built just after the end of the series of cataclysms which occurred between about 12,700 and 11,600 years ago.
Right, and you said there were 3, maybe 4, civilizations. One of which was Atlantis?
That's a possibility, but then again, there hasn't been much evidence of Atlantis actually being found. But it's when you look at the technique of construction that you see very different approaches. In Egypt, everything's very linear. In Peru, it tends to be more organic and polygonal. It's a very different technique. And then there's a site in Bolivia called Pumapunku, and there the precision is actually absolutely astonishing. I've taken a 2-foot level and put it up against some of the blocks, and it's basically almost laser flat, the surfaces.
Yeah. So, okay, if we entertain the idea of extraterrestrials possibly having something to do with the Great Pyramid of Egypt and its construction, then why not entertain the idea that extraterrestrials were in Peru or South America or part of informing the Inca Empire, as it were? And you spent a lot of time on this idea that perhaps elongated skulls found in Peru are not just humans doing headboarding, but could be extraterrestrials. And how is that?
Well, we are conducting DNA testing. We've tested about 20 of the elongated skulls of Paracas, which is where I'm at on the coast of Peru. And so far the indication is that the ancestry, at least the maternal ancestry, is not from the Americas, but from around Crimea and the Black Sea. That's where the haplogroups match. And the other largest elongated skulls in the world have been found in the Black Sea area. So we're talking about a migration of people somewhere around 3,000 plus years ago from the Black Sea to Peru.
And we know that people were already living in South America at that time, right?
Oh, sure. Sure. There've been people living, at least here on the coast part, probably for at least 8 or 10,000 years. But they were Homo sapiens sapiens. The more that the study of the elongated skulls continues in a multidisciplined approach, quite a few medical doctors are noting morphological differences in the elongated skulls, which make them not Homo sapiens sapiens, but at a minimum a subspecies of Homo sapiens or possibly even Homo Paracas.
Well, then is it fair to say that perhaps these are just genetic variants of the human race and not extraterrestrials, that somehow they were a mutation or a variant? Because obviously we know the human tree was quite complex, or the pre-human tree, as to say, the hominin tree was quite complex until we became humans. So is it possible that maybe it was some subgroup that was just kind of living in a little pocket somewhere, and then they moved over to Peru or something along those lines?
Yeah, I think so. And I think they were like what's happened through history, through invasion. People are forced out of their home territory, and they have to find a new homeland. Also, of course, as more archaeology is being done, they're discovering other species and subspecies of Homo in different parts of the world. So it could very well be that the Paracas were exactly that they were Homo Paracas or Homo sapiens Paracas, but were close enough to be able to breed with normal people. And that's how the head binding thing began. It was because as the generations went by and they interbred with normal-looking people, the elongated skulls began to shrink in size. And so the head binding was a way to make distinction between the noble class of the society and the common people.
That's very interesting. So the genetics were lost through generation of breeding. So this,
right?
Okay. So when you look at the actual size of the skull itself, the volume, were those skulls actually that much bigger than a typical human skull?
Yeah, it's an ongoing study, but some examples show their cranial volume to be 25% larger than normal. And about a year and a half ago, I was allowed to borrow a newborn baby skull whose volume was at least twice that of a normal human baby.
See that? Okay, so how does a biologist or paleontologist defend that? Is it microcephaly, or which doesn't? In that case, I guess it wouldn't be. But is there something else that they use to say no? Here's a legitimate reason as to why this skull is so large.
No, they actually can't defend it, because the important thing is that it's moved. The subject of the elongated skulls has moved away from archaeology, since archaeologists have a tendency not wanting to touch the subject, to a medical study. So I've had numerous doctors from around the world come and see these elongated skulls, and they simply don't understand what it is they're looking at.
So
there is no medical condition, they say.
So they just simply say, I don't know what it is, shrug their shoulders, and walk away?
Some of them have a tendency to be interested in the subject, and as I get new information, I do send it out to them. That's the great thing about me living in this area. Like, I'm not a visitor to Peru, I live in Peru, so I'm able to access specimens from private collections to be able to increase the database of my study.
Well, how much time do you spend at the Paracas Museum?
Not too much anymore. My great mentor, Senior Juan Navarro, died about 2 years ago. So he and I had a very close relationship. And since he died, his daughters and grandchildren have taken over the museum, and they basically keep it open just as a memorial to him. They're not really that interested in the subject matter.
So what happens if they decide they don't want to do this anymore? What happens to all those artifacts and the skulls?
They'll probably go to the major major museum in Lima.
So for now, how do you have access to do testing?
Well, it's through private collections that are located in this area. Mm-hmm. So that's an ongoing thing.
So you have to constantly apply to get samples to have them sent out and tested?
Well, yeah, on the occasion that it's possible. Mm-hmm. Last October, we had a foundation from California come down. They were having a major tour of Peru, and the leader of that was fascinated with the elongated skulls, and he said that if I was able to get samples, that he would take them back to the U.S. and have them DNA tested, and those are the ones that are being worked on right now. So we were able to get access to 2 that were in a private collection, and we had a forensic dentist do the sampling because, of course, it needed to be a sterile circumstance, and she just happened to be on the tour and volunteered to do this. And so the samples were I think we took 70 samples out of the 2 skulls, and they were sent to 2 different labs, one in Canada and one in the U.S.
Okay. So when you get the results back, what does this tell you?
Well, it's an ongoing process. The mitochondrial or maternal DNA has been tested, and in both cases we can trace the ancestry of the mothers back to the Black Sea. And right now the nuclear DNA, which is almost impossible to get from a 2,400-year-old skull, which is what both of these are, mm-hmm. They're being worked on right now in the U.S. lab.
Where in the Black Sea? Where on what country currently?
Well, it's the Crimea.
Okay.
Which historically has bounced back and forth between Russia and Ukraine, and mm-hmm. Russia has now claimed it and built a giant bridge connecting it to mainland Russia. So I don't think they're planning on leaving anytime soon.
So it's just in this small little territory.
To a great extent, there are other elongated skulls have been found in that general area as well, mm-hmm. Mainly in Russia, but others are starting to show up in Bulgaria and Hungary and other close locations. Actually, I saw one when I was in the National Museum in Turkey about a week and a half ago. So that's brand new to me.
That's fascinating. Yeah, my wife is from Bulgaria, so that gives us another incentive to go back.
Yeah.
Okay, so how are these people living amongst other humans? I mean, how far back do you think that these elongated skull humans or aliens or alien hybrids, whatever they were, what period of time are they living in this area?
Well, that picture is becoming more and more complicated. So the ones of Paracas, so far we can date them back to about 700 BC. That seems to be when they first arrived here. And then the ones in the Crimea area are more or less contemporary with that. But the 2 that I saw in Turkey recently, supposedly they've been carbon dated to 7,000 years old. So that could be a very different bloodline involved.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything in the testing that tells you that the actual genes are not human or not hominid, not of this earth?
Well, that's the intriguing thing about this process, is that it's becoming faster and faster and cheaper and more complicated in terms of what you get out of it. But we had four of the skulls from the Paracas area that were tested, again, just the maternal side, the program simply came back with an answer of unknown, so that it couldn't match with any known human ethnic group.
Is that something that occurs in this kind of testing normally? Is that unexpected for an unknown to pop up?
No, normally that would be the result of contamination. Mm-hmm. But we were very stringent in the way that we've done all of the testing so far.
Right.
And so the idea that nothing came up, or that that it was the result of contamination. Even the ones doing the testing had their DNA tested, and there was no match. So that's why it's a very complex picture and an ongoing study.
Well, science relies on repeatability, correct, in these sort of
right.
studies. So if things are getting cheaper, then perhaps over time you'll be able to repeat testing more than once, several times perhaps, and see what you come up with?
Oh, yeah, and ongoing with new samples as they show up.
Okay, fascinating. So how do you get the funding to get all these things tested?
Well, the first testing was actually done by the first major testing was done by a group in the United States. Mm-hmm. It was actually one couple that donated to a colleague of mine to have this done, and then this other foundation is the one that's done the two more recent ones, and they basically set like no limit to how much they're planning on spending. So that's why they will be the avenue that I'll be going through once I get more samples to be tested.
Okay, so they're sort of your angels at this point.
Basically, yeah.
Okay, have you set up anything else where crowdfunding or anything like that to raise even more funds?
No, because I tried that once and it was okay, but again, they've basically said there is no limit to how much we're going to put into this. So we'll just see how it goes in the future. What
parts of these remains are you testing? Are you taking little samples from the skull, from the hair?
Well, it depends on the condition of the skull. So the recent two were basically perfectly preserved. Take into account they're 2,000 plus years. Actually, they're 2,400 years old because we have them carbon dated. And both have, we sampled hair, teeth, skin, bone, mm-hmm. tendon, and even spinal cord fluid.
Oh, wow. Okay. And so do you take these multiple samples from the same specimen and then and compare the results of each test, or are you taking just one from each?
No, we took 35 samples from each of the two.
Okay, so this is pretty thorough.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. The orange hair, is that something that distinguishes these remains from other bodily remains in the area at the time, or is that like an aging process? Why are they orange?
It's actually auburn, which is a very dark, okay. like a dark fiery red.
Okay.
And two hair experts examined, I think, 200 samples of the hair. Mm-hmm. This hair is only found in the nobility of the Paracas, and they both claimed that it's Caucasian hair. It's not Native American.
Okay, so when you compare a Native South American body and remains to one of these remains, for the most part, the hair of the Native American is darker. It's not
black.
It's black. It's not auburn.
Yeah, that's right. And they've also both stated that black hair cannot, even over time, can't turn dark red. Mm-hmm. Red hair can bleach to blonde in some cases, but black hair can never go to red. So that genetically makes them red-haired people when they were alive.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was curious about. I wasn't sure if there was possibly an aging or an exposure to something in the soil that can alter the color.
No, and also the great thing is that the Paracas area is very desert-like. It's we get half an inch of rain a year, and that's been historic for at least 2,000 years. And so the burials are actually in sand, and there would be nothing, like no foreign material would be in there that could possibly bleach or chemically alter the hair.
Okay, good. Well, I'm excited because my wife and I are planning a trip down to Peru, so we're definitely going to get down to the Paracas, the Inca Museum, and I don't know if you'll be there when we go, whenever that is, but I'll let you know. How often do you do tours down there?
Well, it kind of depends. At this point now, we do 3 major tours of Peru and Bolivia each year, one in June, one in August, one in November. Mm-hmm. But I'm also open to doing shorter tours with smaller numbers of people on occasion.
Yeah, so if somebody wanted to reach out to you to do that, what's the best way to contact you?
Through my website. I have a contact sheet there.
Do you think that the Nazca lines really are a sign to something in the sky, to aliens, or is there something just more down to earth going on there?
Well, it's really complicated, and of the 36 books, I wrote a book just about Nazca because Nazca is about a 3-hour drive from where I am, so I'm in relatively close proximity. Mm-hmm. And the Nazca system goes all the way from Paracas, which is where I'm talking to you from, to Nazca. So 3 hours of driving through where the Nazca lines and geoglyphs are. They were also made by 2 different cultures. The famous Nazca people made them between 100 and 600 AD, and before that, the Paracas were the ones making them from the guesses from around 500 BC to 100 AD. So you have about a 1,000-year timeline, 2 different cultures with 2 different approaches to doing them. So it's a very complicated picture. It's different people have different theories, and I think there are aspects of the different theories that fit together to solve the riddle of the Nazca system.
Well, because I remember years ago watching documentaries on TV and speculating that these designs, the spider, the candelabra, whatever it is, that these are messages to extraterrestrials. And I don't know, I just imagine that if you believe in any sort of mythology or sky gods, maybe you're just doing that for the sky gods, right?
Well, that's a definite possibility. The candelabra is located about a 20-minute drive from where I'm at. It's on the side of a mountain at, I think, about a 30-degree angle. So you can only see it either from the sea or from the air. And then the famous astronaut character, which is, again, on the side of a mountain in the Nazca area, has one arm up in the air as if waving, and it, again, is at about a 30-degree angle. All the other ones are in general on the flat surface. So I think the ones that the Nazca people made were ceremonial pathways, and the ones that the Paracas did, which are older, are more enigmatic, and I'm still working on that.
Okay. So mainstream archaeology hasn't really answered that question either, correct?
No, they haven't. The problem is that the Nazca people decimated their environment at around 600 AD and most had to abandon the area up and go up into the highlands of Peru and become amalgamated with other cultures. So there is no direct genetic line or oral tradition to trace back to them. So that's why a lot of this or a lot of what's been written is speculation as to why these things were done. But they covered hundreds of square miles. It's not like a small area where they're done. Mm-hmm. Some of them are several hundred feet long. It would take a very complex organization to be able to do this stuff.
Right. Which includes the megaliths of the time as well. And we're still discovering so much more faster now with satellite imagery, correct?
Oh yeah. And with the new technology called LiDAR, which can look through especially rainforests.
Oh yeah.
And find structures, stone structures that are underneath the tree canopy.
Is it exciting for you living there? Do people constantly contact you, call you, knock on your door, and say, "Hey, I found this or discovered that"?
Yeah, it's I'm living a dream, I guess. I wouldn't give this up for anything, and I'm more or less the leading researcher of the Paracas elongated skulls, and also one of the major ones in terms of the megaliths up in the Cusco area. So I think I'll easily be able to spend the rest of my life discovering new things as time goes on.
What evidence would you present in defense of ancient aliens being the ones that came here and helped us with our society, with our building, perhaps interbreeding, versus just an ancient civilization, like you said, that has gone extinct?
Well, unfortunately, the only evidence that is around is of the stone the stone megalithic and other artifacts. Mm-hmm. There's no evidence of there's so many books and theories that have been written about Atlantis, but no actual concrete evidence has been found. And the only other ancient civilization people talk about is the lost continent of Mu that supposedly was in the Pacific. Yet again, no concrete evidence has been found about that. I think to some degree, in Peru at least, it's the complicated nature of the megalithic polygonal walls that we find up around in Cusco. We've had a number of stonemasons and geologists and engineers with us looking at them, and none of them can explain how they could have been made.
Do you think that South America did have a number of visitors from different continents besides this haplogroup from the Black Sea? Some perhaps from Polynesia, perhaps from Africa?
Not from Africa, but from Polynesia. I've been to Easter Island 3 times. Mm-hmm. And last time I was able to talk to one of the older oral tradition keepers there, and he said that the age of habitation of Easter Island goes back many, many thousands of years prior to the time of the Polynesian migration from Tahiti, which is supposedly around 1000 AD. But he said, no, the history goes much farther back than that. Right.
So any other areas or continents besides Polynesia that you think may have visited the coast of Peru or anywhere in South America, really?
Well, again, it's an ongoing process. There's a lady, a Maori lady who lives in New Zealand, and she has genetic red hair. And she had her DNA tested, and it turns out that she's 30% Persian. So her oral tradition states that her people had to escape a part of Persia thousands of years ago because they were being invaded, and they wound up on the coast of Peru at one point, and then they found Easter Island at one point, and then they found New Zealand, and that's where they decided to build their society. And then approximately 1,000 years ago, the true Polynesian Maori people migrated from Tahiti to New Zealand, took over, and some say exterminated most of the red-haired people.
Which of these megalithic sites excites you the most?
Well, I would say Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo and Machu Picchu in Peru, Pumapunku and Tiwanaku in Bolivia, the Serapeum, which is an underground tunnel system in Egypt that contains 25 boxes that weigh 100 tons apiece. There's an ancient site called Tanis, which is in the Nile Delta that looks like it was hit by a massive cataclysmic destructive force. And now, luckily, Egypt is opening up more and more of their ancient sites to visitors rather than other places that are trying to close the enigmatic sites down. Egypt is actually opening a lot of stuff up now, which is great.
Yeah, and I'm glad the tide is changing there as well.
Yeah.
In Machu Picchu, is there anything in particular there that makes you think that there is a lost technology or alien intervention there?
Well, yeah, the core part of Machu Picchu, which is about 5 or 10%, is megalithic. The stones fit together perfectly. We see signs of cataclysmic damage. So I've been there 78 times, I think now, and
78
I think
times.
It's quite,
wow.
Yeah, I think it's quite clear that the Inca found Machu Picchu as a destroyed megalithic site, the same as they found the city of Cusco as a destroyed megalithic site, and decided to put their presence in both locations and other ones as well.
Where do you lean ultimately, or are you on the fence still between ancient aliens or just an extinct civilization?
Well, it depends where you go. With Pumapunku in Bolivia, I look at that as being an alien construction. The megalithic stuff in Egypt, I see as probably an alien construction. Peru is much more organic, though, so that looks, it's almost playful. So that to me looks more like a human construction. So that's why I say there are at least 3 different societies that were involved in doing all of this incredible work.
Yeah. If you're out and about there, I would expect that you've seen some strange things. Have you ever seen a UFO or anything unexplained in your travels?
Yeah, I've had, I think, 7 good UFO sightings so far. One on the island of Maui, and 6 in Peru.
6 in Peru. Any near Lake Titicaca? Because I know that's supposed to be a hot spot as well.
A lot of people see stuff at Lake Titicaca, and in the Cusco area. All of mine have been here on the coast.
What have you seen?
Well, one example was at about 1 o'clock in the morning. I went outside for some reason, and I looked up, and I saw 12 orb-like objects moving in a manner that each one knew where the other one was. It was almost like seeing, it wasn't that they were rotating right or left, but they were maneuvering amongst each other. And I observed that for about 10 minutes. They went to the left, then they went to the right, and then they just went straight up and disappeared. And then in another case, this was about a year ago, I think, once again I was standing outside at sunset, and this golden ball, which appeared to be the size of a soccer ball, came from my left and went to the right, deadly silent, with like a glowing plasma inside of itself, and that lasted about 10 minutes, going from south to north.
Oh, that's a long sighting. Were you able to try to take a picture of it, or? No. Actually,
the one on Maui was actually a metallic craft. It looked like it was about 100 feet long and was cigar-shaped. In all 3 of those cases and the others, you simply don't want to take your eye off of what you're looking at because you don't know how long it's going to last. So in neither or in none of the cases did I even think about going to get a camera to take a picture. I just wanted to experience it as long as it lasted.
Yeah, see, that's always what I thought was the reasoning for a lack of photographic evidence. Because when you encounter something that is near hypnotizing, you don't want to take your eyes off of it because it could be fleeting. And you turn your eye down, you reach into your pocket, you pull out your phone, you look up, and what if it's gone, right? So I think most people are sort of like fixated on that thing.
Oh, yeah, because it, your brain is trying to compartmentalize what you're looking at. And it can't find a box to put it in. So that's why you simply stare at the object or objects until they're gone, and then afterwards go, okay, what was that?
Yeah, it's almost like a brain freeze.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, great. Brian, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah, so if you want to find out more about Brian Forrester, you can just go to hiddenincatours.com. Do you have anything else coming up, Brian? Any events?
We have a major tour in November in Peru and Bolivia. And then I'm going to a UFO conference actually in Nevada in February. And then our major annual tour of Egypt is in March. And I'm going to be going to Israel for the first time because there are megalithic aspects that have been discovered in Jerusalem that I want to have a look at.
Oh, fascinating. Okay. Well, hopefully we'll keep in touch and we'll have you back on the show again. Maybe we'll do live and we'll take some calls next time.
Okay, great.
All right. Thanks, Brian. All right. Well, this is Alan B. Smith again for Paranormal Now on KGRA Radio. Join us next week, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to 10 p.m. with Rebecca Hardcastle. And, of course, Tom Reed from the UFO Monument Park will be joining us as well to update us on all the legalities and happenings that are occurring around that. All right, this is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now, and until next time, live in the mystery.